Episode 48, Land, Lies, and Loyalty, Joseph Smith's 1841 Leadership Moves. Welcome to the Hidden and Distorted History of the Church series, where we will be looking at the historical aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons. In this series, I will try and inform those unaware of the true facts of Mormon history. Recap. Last week, we explored Orsen Pratt's pamphlet in Scotland introducing the first vision, to Scots, not Americans. Joseph Smith was added again, making yet more changes to the supposedly perfect Book of Mormon. We'll also met John C. Bennett and dived into the creation of the Nauvoo Legion. Finally, we saw how Joseph Smith redefined the nature of God and doubled down with a bizarre claim about how Earth was formed. This week, we delve into Joseph Smith's rise to power as the sole trustee-in-trust for the Church and what this move meant for the members under his control. We uncover yet another instance of Joseph's plural marriages, this time his unconventional union with Louisa Beaman. We expose Smith's manipulative tactics as he promoted Nauvoo, a malarial and yellow-fever-ridden wasteland, to unsuspecting settlers, a place where even his own brother perished. We close with a shocking revelation, Joseph's strategic siphoning of church funds to line the pockets of his family and friends. You won't want to miss this episode. Part 1, Prophecy and Property. Joseph Smith consolidates power. On January 30th, 1841, at a conference in Nauvoo, Illinois, Joseph Smith was unanimously elected as the sole trustee-in-trust for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This wasn't just a title. It was a calculated move that handed him exclusive control over all church property and financial affairs. In plain terms, every cent, every acre, and every asset belonging to the church now fell under his personal authority. Smith alone decided how funds were spent, which properties were purchased, and where resources were allocated. He became the financial kingpin of the church. The role of trustee-in-trust was a legal loophole that allowed an individual to hold and manage property on behalf of an organization. In Smith's hands, this meant unilateral control. He became the single legal representative of the church for all property and financial dealings. Unquestioned authority, Smith could manage church funds, buy land, and handle assets entirely on his terms. The church claimed this move was necessary to operate efficiently, especially as Nauvoo expanded. But the real effect was to cement Smith's total domination over both the spiritual and temporal realms of the church. While defenders attempt to justify this as a practical solution, their arguments are paper-thin. Trust me, I've looked, and there's no credible counterpoint to the critics. Let's not forget Smith's spectacular failures in Kirtland, Ohio. Under his leadership, the Monroe Bank collapsed, and the infamous Kirtland Safety Society crumbled, leaving members financially devastated. Fast forward to Nauvoo, and you see history repeating itself. Only this time, Smith had legal authority over everything. Historians like Richard Bushman, Fawn Brody, Dan Vogel, and Kenneth H. Wynne have all noted that this move coincided with mounting accusations of financial corruption. These didn't just come from outsiders like Thomas Sharp or Governor Boggs. They came from insiders, William Law, John C. Bennett, Thomas Marsh, and others who had first-hand knowledge of Smith's dealings. Critics allege that Smith used church resources to benefit himself, his family, and his inner circle. And the evidence, we'll get to that soon enough. These financial grievances fueled dissent among church members and heightened tensions with the broader Illinois community. On February 8, 1841, all church assets were officially assigned to Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith wasn't just a supposed prophet, he was a man who blurred the lines between divine leadership and personal enrichment. And in Nauvoo, those blurred lines became impossible to ignore. Part 2, Joseph takes on yet another wife. On April 5, 1841, Joseph Smith performed his first fully documented plural marriage, taking Louisa Beaman as a secret wife. The clandestine ceremony took place in a secluded grove of trees in Nauvoo, Illinois. To avoid detection, Louisa reportedly wore men's clothing to disguise her identity as she made her way to the ceremony. The officiant of this marriage was Joseph Bates Noble, a trusted confidant and member of Smith's inner circle, who later testified about the event. This marriage was conducted without the knowledge or consent of Emma, highlighting the secrecy and complexity that would come to define Smith's practice of plural marriage. At the time, the church had not publicly disclosed any revelations or teachings related to polygamy, and the practice was outright denied by church leaders in public forums. Nevertheless, Smith pressed forward in private, initiating a controversial and morally fraught chapter of Mormon history. Louisa Beaman, who was 26 years old at the time, came from a faithful Latter-day Saint family. Her marriage to Smith is believed to have been an early test case in the secret practice of plural marriage, which Smith justified using alleged divine revelations. Later accounts suggest that Smith presented the concept of plural marriage as a commandment directly from God, with eternal rewards promised to those who obeyed and dire consequences threatened for those who resisted. This event set a precedent for how Smith would conduct plural marriages, in secrecy, shrouded in layers of deception, and often involving close associates who could be trusted to maintain confidentiality. Noble, for instance, later admitted that he felt deeply conflicted about his role in the marriage, but complied due to Smith's insistence and claims of divine authority. In hindsight, this marriage, carried out in a hidden grove and under a veil of disguise, foreshadowed the larger controversies and scandals that polygamy would bring to the fledgling church. It marked the beginning of a secretive practice that would not only strain Smith's personal relationships, but also ignite internal dissent, provoke external opposition, and leave a legacy of division within Mormonism that persists to this day. Part 3. Orsen Hyde sent away under false pretense. In April 1841, Joseph Smith sent Orsen Hyde, an apostle in the Quorum of the 12, on a mission to Jerusalem, a move steeped in bold claims and grandiose visions. Smith framed Hyde's journey as a fulfillment of ancient prophecy, tying his fledgling church to the grand narrative of the Bible and positioning himself as the chosen leader of the prophesied restoration of Israel. This was not merely a missionary trip. It was a calculated attempt to elevate the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints onto a global stage, cloaked in the rhetoric of divine mandate. Hyde's task was to travel thousands of miles to Jerusalem, climb the Mount of Olives, and dedicate the land for the return of the Jewish people and the eventual second coming of Christ. Smith conveniently claimed this act would fulfill Scripture and establish his church as the instrument of God's will on earth. But let's not ignore the audacity of this endeavor, sending one man, poorly funded and largely alone, across the Atlantic and through Europe to Ottoman-controlled Palestine, all under the guise of fulfilling a divine prophecy. Hyde endured relentless challenges, traveling in isolation, scraping by financially, and navigating the treacherous conditions of 19th century travel. He finally reached Jerusalem in October 1841 and offered the now famous dedicatory prayer on the Mount of Olives. In this prayer, Hyde consecrated the land for the Jewish people, a bold and symbolic act that Smith undoubtedly used to bolster his narrative of prophetic authority. But was this mission truly inspired, or was it a calculated spectacle? Critics argue it was little more than a publicity stunt, a desperate attempt by Smith to legitimize his movement by associating it with sacred biblical locations. Sending Hyde to Jerusalem allowed Smith to claim divine endorsement while conveniently ignoring the glaring logistical and practical issues. After all, the church was facing financial struggles and mounting external pressures in Nauvoo, yet Smith diverted resources to send one man halfway around the world to perform a symbolic act that had no immediate benefit to his struggling followers. This mission didn't just highlight Smith's ambition, it underscored his tendency to conflate grandiose claims with questionable priorities. While the church paints Hyde's journey as a pivotal moment in its history, the reality is far more complex. It was a gamble, a strategic move to shore up Smith's prophetic image, even as internal dissent and external opposition mounted. Whether Hyde's journey was inspired or opportunistic, it was a stark reminder of the lengths Smith would go to secure his legacy as the self-proclaimed restorer of God's kingdom. Part 4. Nauvoo, a Land of Death. The events of mid-August 1841 exposed Joseph Smith's reckless promotion of Nauvoo's disease-infested bottomland to unsuspecting immigrants. Just a week before, on August 7th, Smith's own brother, Don Carlos Smith, succumbed to malaria, one of countless deaths in this deathly sickly hole. Despite witnessing the devastating toll firsthand, Smith continued to present Nauvoo as the divinely ordained Zion, luring new converts to settle in a place he privately condemned as unlivable. In his correspondence with the land's previous owner, Smith explicitly described Nauvoo's swampy terrain as deathly and unfit for habitation, lamenting that it was unable to realize valuable consideration. Yet, he shamelessly admitted to keeping up appearances and holding out inducements to encourage immigration. These words paint a damning picture of a leader willing to sacrifice the health and lives of his followers to maintain the facade of prosperity and growth. Smith's relentless promotion of Nauvoo was not rooted in concern for his followers' well-being, but in his obsession with building his so-called Zion. The fledgling city's survival, and Smith's vision of power, depended on swelling its population and workforce. Immigrants were drawn in with promises of a flourishing community, only to arrive and face rampant malaria, yellow fever, and other deadly diseases. For many, Nauvoo was not a promised land, but a death sentence. This calculated gamble had tragic consequences. Families were torn apart by illness, with many burying loved ones almost as soon as they arrived. Don Carlos Smith's death is a chilling example of the reality Smith was willing to overlook in favor of promoting his grandiose plans. The death toll among the saints was not an unforeseen tragedy. It was the inevitable result of Smith's decision to place his ambitions above the safety of his followers. Critics rightfully argue that Smith's actions reveal a pattern of manipulation and disregard for human life. He knowingly promoted a hazardous settlement while privately acknowledging its dangers, leaving his followers to pay the price. The suffering endured by the saints in Nauvoo's bottomlands is a sobering reminder of the human cost of blind loyalty to a leader whose priorities lay in maintaining power and appearances at any cost. Part 5. A Lie to Sell Land. On August 16, 1841, just a day after Joseph Smith's brazen promotion of Nauvoo's disease-ridden bottomlands, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles issued an epistle urging saints from around the world to gather in Nauvoo. This call to action further cemented the Church's efforts to swell its population and labor force, even as Nauvoo struggled under the weight of its already devastating health crisis. The epistle portrayed Nauvoo as a sacred gathering place, promising land would be designated for new settlers. It painted a picture of opportunity and divine purpose, urging saints to abandon their homes and livelihoods elsewhere to join what they were told was God's chosen city. However, the reality was far bleaker. Incoming immigrants faced overcrowded conditions, insufficient resources, and a swampy, disease-infested environment that Joseph Smith himself had described as a deathly, sickly hole. This coordinated effort to attract more settlers, despite the known dangers, raises glaring ethical questions about the Church's priorities. The leadership, including Smith and the 12, seemed more concerned with bolstering Nauvoo's numbers and image than safeguarding the lives and well-being of its members. It wasn't just a gamble. It was a calculated risk that placed institutional growth over human life. The timing of this epistle is particularly damning. It came just days after the death of Don Carlos Smith, Joseph Smith's brother, from malaria, a tragedy that should have served as a stark warning. Instead, the Church's leaders doubled down, using religious authority to manipulate the faithful into uprooting their lives and flocking to Nauvoo. The promise of designated land and divine protection lured converts into a perilous situation, where many would face illness, suffering, and even death. This epistle exemplifies the Church's relentless drive to build Smith's vision of Zion at any cost, regardless of the human toll. By urging saints to gather in Nauvoo without full transparency about the conditions awaiting them, the 12 contributed to a legacy of exploitation and misplaced trust. For the faithful, this call was a test of devotion. For the leadership, it was a cynical ploy to sustain their ambitions on the backs of those who believed their promises. Part 6. Joseph Pads Some Pockets. On August 31, 1841, the 12 apostles handed Joseph Smith an unchecked endorsement of his self-serving maneuvers, voting unanimously to approve his actions in transferring church property to his own family and friends. This was no mere administrative decision. It was a blatant power grab. The 12's approval essentially sanctified Smith's decision to funnel church resources into the hands of his closest allies and loved ones, ensuring that his personal circle would enjoy secure inheritances at the expense of the church's broader mission. The official vote read like a legal blanket that gave Smith carte blanche to continue deeding church property to his wife, children, and hand-picked associates under the guise of securing their support and future. They justified it with the vague notion that Smith's wisdom would guide the process. In other words, the 12 allowed Smith to wield absolute control over the church's assets, determining who would benefit from the wealth accumulated through the faith of its members. What's striking here is the audacity of it all. The very foundation of the church's teachings stressed sacrifice and commitment to a communal Zion. Yet here we see Joseph Smith securing his own dynasty, ensuring his family's future while cloaking the whole operation in divine sanction. No longer was it just about building Zion. It was about making sure that Smith's immediate circle would have a privileged, inherited position in this so-called heavenly kingdom. It's hard to overlook the glaring conflict of interest. While Joseph Smith was, in theory, leading the church toward salvation, he was simultaneously enriching himself and those closest to him. The members who contributed their time, labor, and money to build up the church were not invited to share in these blessings. Instead, Smith positioned himself as both the spiritual leader and financial gatekeeper, further consolidating his authority and wealth under the guise of divine wisdom. This unanimous vote from the 12 was a betrayal of the members, one that prioritized Joseph Smith's personal gain over the well-being of the saints. In essence, it was an endorsement of nepotism and financial mismanagement disguised as religious duty. The proceeding laid bare the growing patterns of corruption and self-interest within the leadership, with the 12 aiding and abetting Smith's increasingly autocratic rule. And while they framed it as divinely sanctioned, it became evident that the true purpose was not to build Zion, but to secure the financial future of Joseph Smith and his inner circle. Joseph Smith's leadership in Nauvoo exemplified his consolidation of power, both spiritually and materially. By securing control over church assets, engaging in secretive practices like plural marriage, and manipulating his followers with grandiose promises, Smith's actions reveal a pattern of self-enrichment at the expense of his followers. From the dangerous promotion of Nauvoo's swamplands to using church resources to benefit his family, Smith's authority was driven by personal ambition, not divine guidance. The tragic consequences for those who trusted him underscore the darker side of his prophetic image. Ultimately, Smith's vision of Zion was built on manipulation, secrecy, and exploitation. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.